Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Resilient Health Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Darren Ingalls, and I'm really excited to bring today, really, I think one of the most advanced and influential leaders in functional medicine to the table. Dr. Peter Kahn's a board certified integrative medicine, functional medicine, and chiropractic neurologist. He's the creator of the Neurometabolic Integration Program. It's a science based virtual coaching program that helps clients identify the root cause of autoimmunity and other chronic conditions. And if you guys have been tuning in, we talk a lot about these because they're so prevalent and they affect so many people. So today we're going to talk about really the three major drivers of illness and how to fix it. So Dr. Kahn, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Ingalls.
So, before we kind of dive in deeper, maybe tell you a little bit about your backstory about your son. I know there's a really interesting story that kind of drove you to functional medicine. Would you be willing to share that with us today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for giving me a chance to share my story. For me, it actually started when I was in chiropractic school. My father actually had liver cancer, stage 4, and he was elderly, at the time, 75, and they said, "Hey, he's 75, for 6 months to live." And that was it. And at the time, I didn't know anything. I was in chiropractic school, so my brother, who's also a chiropractor, we kind of took it into our hands and say, okay, let's try to just do whatever we can to help him. So we just put him on a few supplements. He made some diet changes. Lo and behold, he lived like 4 to 5 years, symptom free. And when he went really quickly. So, that was like a big lesson for me. Like, no matter how severe it is, there's always hope, right? There's something you can do to potentially make things better. We probably just stumble onto the right thing. We have no clue what we're doing, but it helped him. That was the bottom line. Fast forward, I had kids. My son, when he was like a year and a half, just a toddler, right, just walking at grandpa's cabin, they were making pasta, and then he kind of ran into them while they're trying to pour the hot water into the drain, and just got all on him. So he got third-degree burns, scalding injury on the left side of his upper body. I mean, it was horrific. Basically, we had to helivac him, not heli, we had to like air fly him back to the States because like where they were in the cabins in Canada, they didn't have good medical. So we came back to Arizona Burn Center, and it was hard to watch, a young child who doesn't know what they can't even communicate, just screaming in pain. I mean, burn injury is one of the most traumatic things. And then that followed with months of just dressing and changing and all that. But what came after that was that he developed allergies that you never had, sensitivity to things you never had. He developed neurological symptoms like severe night terror, where every night he would wake up multiple times screaming, having night terrors. He developed severe mood issues where he just throw like crazy temper tantrums, screaming fits. My wife would try to put him in a child seat in the car at the supermarket, and we couldn't restrain him to put it in the car. It looked like we're abducting him. uh, so it's just got really bad. We thought he was going to be autistic. So that led me down the road of like, okay, we need to find some solutions. And I actually started taking out functional neurology. Kind of got did fellowship training with Dr. Robert Merlillo, who's one of the leaders in addressing child development disorders. So I got my fellowship in child development disorder, and got my board certification in chiropractic neurology to really learn about the brain. And then and that's when I got exposed to gluten, Dr. Tom O'Brien and all of that. So went down the road of gluten, and we started going gluten free. But then my daughter at the time, who also was a baby, got severe dairy anaphylaxis reaction, had to go to the hospital. And then, so that led us down to looking at food sensitivity. So then more functional medicine, and then kind of just, eventually led to me kind of seeing the connection between the brain and, what the functional medicine has to offer as far as looking at the metabolic factors. So that's kind of how I put together this neurometabolic integration, because the brain, the immune, and the gut are definitely interconnected, and they kind of co-create symptoms in a lot of chronic cases.
Well, I can just imagine. I mean, have a 1.5-year-old with a burn like that. We talk so much about trauma causing all of these disruptions to the brain and the gut. I can only imagine that just must have been such a huge trauma for him that, I mean, yeah, how do you process that at that age and, understand?
I think some of it is internalized, right? I mean, we haven't
Yeah.
really completely dealt with it. I mean, he seems to be fine, but I'm sure some of that is stored in his body of some kind of memory, PTSD from that trauma. But kids are resilient. Not everybody with a scalding injury or burn injury or trauma all gets messed up later in life. But it's something that could happen, and we keep an eye on it.
Well, I guess that, that leads us into really talking about, I think you've sort of coined this term, but I like it, the big, you have your big masterclass. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but BIG being the brain immune gut axis. And maybe just tell us a little bit about, what that is and why is that important for us?
Yeah, I mean, so I came up. I didn't come up with it. I mean, it's all in the literature, right? All over the place about. Well, there's the brain gut connection everybody hears of, the gut brain axis, the gut brain gut axis. So everybody know the connection between the brain and gut. That when your gut is dysfunctional, that can lead to neurological and brain issues. When your brain is dysfunctional, that can lead to gut issues. But really, that the connection is actually three-way. It's between the brain, the immune system, and the gut, right? So, and when we don't say it that way, I'm just really bringing it to the fore and really put a big spotlight on it, because we don't say that. People just think that, oh, brain gut, so take some probiotic and just solve all my problem, right? They think, oh, the gut microbiome, it's going to impact the brain. It sure does. But if taking a probiotic doesn't solve the problem, nobody will have brain gut issues. It's much more complicated than that. We can simplify it, but I want people to have a much better appreciation for the nuances of how that system works. So the brain immune gut connection is really what drives a lot of these immunological inflammatory issues that can cause brain and gut issues. And what I notice in practice, that when people show up with chronic conditions, many times they have this brain immune gut axis dysfunction where they'll display symptoms and signs in all three areas. They have neurological issues, they have immune system problems, they have gut issue. So whether they came in from Lyme, right, as you're an expert in, or they come in for a mold issue, or they come in with fibromyalgia, or they come in with Hashimoto, invariably it always check the box, brain, immune, gut, very often for all of them, right? So it's like, why do they all look very similar despite having different diagnoses? This is what led to my discovery through just clinical practice and watching patterns that, yeah, all these people have brain immune gut challenges. So is there a connection there? And turns out there is, because when one piece of that domino fails or falls, the other pieces, that brain immune gut axis, also fail. So when you have gut issue, the immune system and the brain start to get dysfunctional. When you have brain issue, the immune system and the gut become dysfunctional. When you have immune system problem, the gut and the brain get dysfunctional. So we can start to actually put this together and make it useful, because so many people with chronic condition, Dr. Ingalls, as you know, they start to go down all these rabbit holes, and they start to think like they have everything under the sun, and they may or may not. But what happens is they started collecting these diagnoses and labels, and they even collect supplements, try to treat all these supposed diagnoses and labels without any systematic way of untangle all these things. So by understanding that, okay, you may have 20 symptoms, but it may come from one big connection, the brain immune gut connection, that helped them to simplify and to know like, okay, this is what I'm dealing with, and to see it more holistically instead of like try to chase after, symptom masking treatments, or, focusing on just one isolated part of the puzzle without connecting that with the other parts.
So, I know there can be so many different routes of entry, again, whether the initial effect is the brain, or it's a disruption of the immune system, or the gut, but eh, that could, of course, entail so many different symptoms. But are there specific red flags for you that stand out, that's like, hey, if I'm experiencing X, Y, or Z, I really need to get this investigated?
Yeah, and that's a great point. Sometimes it's the chicken or the egg, right? Did the brain symptom drive the gut issue, or the gut problem started it all, or is it the immune system imbalance that started it all? And you're exactly right. The route of entry can be all of those things. Could be the brain that started. Someone have a concussion, and that's what started everything. Someone who have gastroenteritis, traveler's diarrhea, gut infection, and that started kind of mess things up. Or someone with, a viral infection, or some kind of inflammation, or even an injury, musculoskeletal injury, that can start this inflammatory cascade. So there's a lot of things that can kind of mess the system up. Um, I think the way we want to think about the system is that we want to think about, okay, is there this interconnection between them all. And usually what I do is I start out by asking, okay, I do a screening. I screen, okay, is there neurological symptoms? Well, what would be neurological symptoms? Well, fatigue is one. And a lot of time people don't associate fatigue as a neurological symptom, but it absolutely is, right? I mean, where the heck do you experience fatigue? You don't experience it in your buttock, you experience it in your brain, right? So fatigue, if people tell me they have fatigue, I try to help them understand, yeah, that's a brain symptom. Well, I mean, it could be a fuel delivery problem, but invariably you experience that in the brain. Now, if you have brain fog, fatigue, short-term memory issue, depression, anxiety, mood disorder, these are all going to kind of fall in the category that you have some type of neurological CNS problem, central nervous system issue. And we need to find out what's driving that. So that's brain. And then next we look at, if do you have any immune system challenges? Well, that will be things like autoimmune. That would be things that you get sick all the time, frequent illness. That would be things like you have allergies and asthma. That would be things like you are sensitive to everything under the sun. You're sensitive to chemicals, sensitive to every food. These are all immunological reactions. So if there's those things going on, it's like, another check, brain, immune. Then we check the gut box. Do you have gas, bloating, reflux, heartburn, bowel movement issues, IBS, SIBO, SIFO, whatever. So that if you do, it's like, brain, immune, gut. And usually these people are, oh yeah, I have all these symptoms, and they become a mystery patient to somebody. And then, they're taking way too many supplements and they don't even know why they're taking them for. And that become a stress in and of itself, right? I mean, there's a time and place for somebody may need a lot of supplement, but what I'm saying is usually what I see is a lot of people are taking too much for what they're actually needing, and they don't even know why they're doing it. And they're simply doing it because they heard it on a summit, or they Dr. Googled it and it sounds like a good idea. But when there's no understanding of this big access and getting this big idea, then it becomes like kind of a free for all. And we want to avoid that because that's not the most efficient way to get there.
Yeah, I see that as such a common problem in my practice where whether it's from a practitioner or like you said, Dr. Google, people are on, 20, 30, 40, 50 different supplements, sometimes very well intended, but if we believe that part of that access is that the gut is disrupted, I mean, in my mind, I keep thinking, well, the gut has to absorb it, the liver has to break it down. And if you're already having deficits in those areas, aren't we just taxing that system even more? And, I work with a lot of kids with autism, who are, mostly young children. And, asking a young child to take 40 different things is, in my mind, very taxing. So, how do we balance what's really necessary to move the needle forward, but not necessarily constantly putting a band-aid on individual symptoms? And I think all of us in functional medicine at some point are probably guilty of doing that. But I guess for those tuning in, just sort of have that awareness that, if this is part of what you've been struggling with, I guess we have to be very conscientious about, supplements, medications, herbs, because again, your body has to break all these things down.
Yeah, I mean, self-diagnosing, self-treat. I mean, it's one thing to advocate for yourself and educate yourself and take a greater proactive role for yourself. It's another thing to try to self-diagnose, self-treat to the 10th degree and do it overboard, right? So there's a balance there where we encourage people to learn. In fact, that's what we do. We want people to learn. We want to learn, the right way with the right context. So they're not just like taking one idea completely out of context and just think that that's the solution for them and just take the supplements and be fine. So
Well, again, with the understanding that there's so many different, again, points of entry, maybe let's just talk a little bit about some of the more common sort of root causes that you see in your practice of what's setting off this BIG axis.
yeah, so what I do is I kind of develop this clinical framework, a roadmap I call it, but it's a framework how I think about, when people present with problems, how do I kind of prioritize their finding? And the way that I do that is, there's like this multi-tiered approach. So the first step that I always look at is I look at fuel delivery. So fuel delivery means like, are you able to deliver blood to your tissue? Like if you have poor circulation, you have small vessel disease, or your blood pressure is low, you're hypotensive, then that means that you can't get blood to your tissue. You have poor perfusion. If you can't perfuse, then it doesn't matter what all this fancy supplement or healthy food they're eating, it can't get to where it needs to go, right? So I look at perfusion as a primary thing. And so many people, especially in the allopathic world, they go to the doctor, they do their regular checkup, and they're told that your blood pressure is good. Like, what does that mean? It turns out it's actually low. Maybe it's not low enough for them to pass out, but certainly not good enough for them to feel great. Normal blood pressure is 120 20/80. If somebody's pressure is 95, 90 over 60, I mean, that's kind of low-ish, right? And then you ask, do you get dizzy, when you change position? Oh yeah, I get dizzy easily. I get orthostatic, hypotensive. I have poor mental endurance. I'm tired all the time. I'm cold all the time. It's like, okay, you start to put the picture together that this person may have poor perfusion. And I consider that like the first thing that I would address, regardless whether they have metal, they have whatever, because if you have poor perfusion, whatever we try to do with metals and hormones, it may not work because you don't have like the basic foundation that's just this metabolism going.
Right.
That's what I start. And then the next step will be blood sugar. And then that's such a common thing for people to have blood sugar dysfunction, whether they're hypoglycemia, with their insulin resistance, or low or high blood sugar, or a mixed pattern of low and high, which means that unstable blood sugar. It's a really damaging thing to the body. It's also making it very difficult for you to deliver fuel, especially to your brain. Your brain runs on glucose, alternatively ketone. But if you have low blood sugar, your brain cells will suffer. And this is why hypoglycemic symptoms are the hangriness, the irritation, the lightheaded, dizzy, irritable, and short and memory issues. You can't focus. These are all brain symptoms. Hypoglycemia is a brain problem, not a blood sugar problem. So we have to address that in order to deliver fuel to the brain and to the rest of the body to drive all these other chemical reactions. So I take kind of a phased approach, step-by-step approach to kind of triage, right? See, okay, what's the most foundational things we can make better? And then we can layer the other stuff on top, because then those things might work.
So for people who are listening, and they're like, you're ticking off all the boxes. I'm like, yeah, this is me. This is me. Where should people really start in addressing all these issues? Is it really a function that they need to get a lot of testing done to help evaluate where they're at, or, where really should people start this process?
Yeah, and just so you know, Dr. Ingalls, everybody, I think the cool thing about natural medicine and functional medicine is that there's more than one way to skin a cat sometimes, right? For somebody with the same exact problem, you fix their gut, they feel some better. You fix their blood sugar, they feel some better. It's just a matter of, for that particular person, what is the most appropriate thing to do for them? But that's a great question. How do we find out what to do? I think it comes down to like identifying in yourself, right? Doing some type of assessment to identify what the actual problem is and what is your priority. That could be done through blood tests. That could be done through seeing a doctor like Dr. Ingalls to do, a really detailed history and examination. But that can also be taught to people, I believe. I think you can teach people to how to recognize some of these signs and symptoms in themselves, and then be able to say, okay, I think I can narrow the field here to like about this area. That's kind of my priority here. Like, for example, if you have hypoglycemia, that's a set of pretty obvious symptoms, right? You don't eat, you feel shaky, lightheaded, irritable. You eat, you relieve that shaky, lightheaded, irritable.
Right.
It relieves that. That's a shoe in for you have hypoglycemia. If you have insulin resistance, on the other hand, you might feel fatigue after a big carby meal, right? You eat a big pasta dinner, you feel drowsy, you fall asleep afterwards. You have some triple weight gain. You gain weight easily. So you have these classic insulin resistance patterns that you can actually put yourself in one camp or the other, or sometimes you have both. But you can put yourself in that category and say, okay, hypoglycemia, then maybe I eat in a different way than I would if I'm insulin resistant, right? So like if you're hypoglycemic, you probably don't want to do like 3-day water fast. And if you're insulin resistant, you might be able to do that. So that's kind of changes what someone might do for themselves. And this is what we try to teach people, to teach people how to recognize some of these things that are low hanging fruit, but that's really valuable. If we give them the context behind it, help them understand the mechanism, how that's generated, then they can actually make better decisions for themselves, or even have better conversations with the functional doctor that they're working with, to be able to communicate in such a way that, okay, I think I have this stuff going on because I have XYZ symptoms. I think that's all very helpful and very empowering. And we try to do that.
Well, I was told by a very wise doctor early in my career that if you just listen to people, they'll tell you what's wrong. And, I was a medical technologist. I worked in a hospital lab. That was my career before being a doctor. And I swear, the longer I practice, the less testing I do. You realize you get so many clues just from what people are telling you and how they react in different environments and with or without food. So we get so much useful information just from really listening and hearing the whole story that sometimes testing can be very helpful to really hone in on a specific problem, but a lot of times we glean that information just from the history alone.
I totally agree. I totally have the same experience where over time I'm running less and less lab tests. And I think another problem I want to bring up is a lot of people, they'll come into my practice, having seen other practitioners, especially functional practitioners, and they'll bring in all these labs, right? Like, nutrient testing, whatever, and then some of these tests is like, do you really need that? Did you really spend like $3,000
Yeah.
doing 6 different tests? And all it told you is that you're deficient in all the nutrients. So the solution is a multivitamin. If multivitamin was going to solve the problem, then nobody will have problems. So it's almost like, we want to help people to be able to like make better decisions for themselves. So they're not wasting their valuable resources on tests that are just not clinically useful. And you'd be surprised how many tests out there that either is clinically just not that useful or it didn't apply to that person in that situation, right? Like when we have no any need to go down that road of testing this particular thing, but they went ahead and tested anyway because it sounds cool because these functional labs give you pretty color graphics and you feel like you're getting something. But I think people should understand this is why I'm doing this, right? We're having this great conversation. I think for a lot of people, maybe they already spend a lot of money. Don't feel bad about it. Just know that, hey, what did you get out of it? If you got something out of it, you actually improve from that, great. But oftentimes people don't get actual answers from these tests because it's just some of these tests just sounds good theoretically or hypothetically, but what does that actually mean? That takes practice, right? That takes the context of a practitioner like Dr. Ingalls to be able to interpret that and let you know, okay, what does that mean in your overall picture? I think some of this can be translated to layperson. Like that's what I try to do. I try to teach people, okay, this is what this test means, and this is what this test would do, and this is what this test would not tell you. So don't go do that test thinking it's going to tell you that when it doesn't, right? So then you're using the test for the right reason.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point of why sometimes it's really in your best interest to work with someone like yourself or myself, because it's, our years of experience and training that, I mean, people who are trying to DIY it, they spent already thousands of dollars on tests and supplements that haven't worked. And they don't want to spend the money on a functional medicine doctor because, a lot of us aren't insurance based, and I understand that, but we also can help streamline your process and cut to the chase sometimes a lot faster, so you're not trying just a bunch of random things and guessing and seeing what works. We have the luxury of seeing, lots of people seeing what works, what doesn't work, and so we have a pretty good sense and a hierarchy in which we can implement different therapies without throwing the kitchen sink at you. So just tuck that away in the back of your mind that this might be a good financial and health investment, is to get in the hands of a good functional medicine practitioner.
That's such a great point. I think people tend to think that they're saving money by DIY, do it yourself. When over the long term, they may end up spending more because they're spending all this money on tests that doesn't mean anything or that's not relevant, and they're still not getting any closer to getting better. And they may be spending a lot of money taking supplement based on those tests that are not relevant to them. And so the supplement's not relevant either. And so it's just all a waste of time. I think, and this is again, this is not saying that it's bad to do that because I think these people are just looking for answers, right? I think a lot of people, and that's actually very admirable that they're looking for answers, that are so proactive, and we actually want to work with people like that. But I think some wisdom and straight talk will help them to realize that okay, maybe don't overdo it, balance the needs, but there's a better way to do it.
Well, I feel that way about my mechanic. It's like, look, I could probably sit down and figure out how to, fix something on my car, but the time it would take me to educate myself Whereas I'm going to pay a mechanic who's already been through that training, has the experience, can do that job
And it
in
has the tools. They have
has the
has the tools.
tools
Yeah,
and can do it in 30 minutes where it's going to take me several weeks to figure out how to do it. Yeah, get all the right equipment. It's the process is not efficient when I do it that way. So again, I think your point's very well taken that, this can be really helpful. Again, we all advocate for being an educated person, understanding your process, but certainly if you've tried doing things on your own and you're not getting success, that's probably a good time to, I say, get in the hands of someone who can do a little bit more hand holding with you and give you better guidance.
absolutely.
So before we wrap up, I wanted you to share a little bit about your big masterclass. I know you've been doing this for a while, and can you just tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So the Brain Immune Gut Masterclass is my way of giving back, sharing what I learned about the brain immune gut axis and why it's so important. It's kind of an entry point. It's a way for people to get exposed to the idea who haven't been exposed to it. Many people who, have attended the summit actually multiple times. Basically, it consists a lot of these masterclass mastery sessions where I teach on a specific part of the roadmap, and then I invite guests like yourself to speak on a specific part of that roadmap to basically, corroborate with what I'm saying. Like, hey, look, Dr. Ingalls know what he's talking about when it comes to Lyme infection, and this is why we're seeing how that impact brain immune gut. So we bring that to the fore so people can start to see that, okay, this is impacting a lot of things and potentially there's a better way of doing it that could be more streamlined instead of just taking a supplement for every ill. We want to help you to be able to streamline, get the right answers. And really my goal is not just help people to get better. My goal is to help elevate the consciousness, right? Get people to be smarter, to be knowledgeable and have wisdom, so they have a bunch of bits and pieces of information they learn from all these different summits, but they don't know how to put them together. My goal is to help people to be able to use the information they already got, but put them in a specific order so that they can actually benefit. So this masterclass is, it did really well received. We ran it several times, and every time we do, people just give great feedback, and we invite great speakers like yourself as well.
Well, I'm so honored to be part of your latest version of the masterclass, but I got to tell everybody listening, I have seen the modules that you put out there. This is really, I mean, one of the best masterclasses I've ever seen put together because every module it teaches so much great information, but it gives you actionable things that you can do every single time. It's not one of these things where you spend a lot of money on these classes and you're like, you get a bunch of theory and stuff that's not really very practical. And everything that you do and you teach, it's like, this is what you can do today to make a difference in your life, make a difference in your health. So we're going to drop the link in the show notes. You'll definitely want to check it out. So Dr. Khan, thank you again so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.